Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of the day, we're taking a little bit of a break from talking fantasy football in terms of the NFL and now transitioning into the college football portion of the show. Always love talking about it, and this week is no different because week 13 of the college football season is going to determine a lot. It's going to determine some outcomes in certain races around the Big Ten, potentially the Big 12. And there are just going to be some good old-fashioned fun games that might not mean anything, but still could be exciting from a fantasy college football perspective. So if you are a fantasy college football segment, or enthusiast, or player, or even just a casual fan, and you might want to be interested in it next year, this segment is for you, because this week is all about the big matchups. So without further ado, let's talk about them, starting off with a big one in the Big Ten. Easiest game to start off with, looking at it from a real-life and fantasy perspective, Indiana, Ohio State. The loser of this one, most likely out of the CFP, potentially, maybe the CFP committee, if Indiana doesn't lose by that much, keeps them in, but it certainly looks like the loser of this one could be out of the CFP race entirely, and the winner all but clinches a spot in the Big Ten Conference Championship game. But I want to take a moment and acknowledge the difference, but the similarities of these two quarterbacks in this game. Because I said, my number one note for this game, that this is a battle of underrated QBs. For Indiana's, let's talk about Curtis Rourke a little bit. Weird season for him, but he's been one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the country, been at the top of many lists in terms of QBR, in terms of touchdown-interception ratio, and most importantly, he has been winning football games for them. Yes, he's had a couple injuries that he's been worried about throughout the season. That thumb that I think kept him out of their game before Michigan, who I'm forgetting who was against. But ultimately, the big thing with him is that he's been distributing the football at a very effective level, and he hasn't been turning it over. This is a tough Ohio State defense, perhaps one of the best defenses in the Big Ten in the country. You have guys like Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, who's most likely going to be a first-round draft pick. You have so many different players, Caleb Downs in the secondary, who are really fearsome and vaunted at their positions. And so if you're Curtis Rourke, you're going to want to do your best to rely on your running mate in the backfield and Justice Ellison, and the receivers that they can down the catch. And then let's talk about Will Howard, because he's also just as critical in this game. Because as good as he's been this year, a lot of my worries about him, knowing him from when he was still in the Big 12 with Kansas State, is that in big moments, he's prone to make some mistakes. And so that's what I feel like a lot of fantasy players have been waiting for, is Will Howard to potentially make that mistake. And Indiana, for as much of an underdog as they are, is going to rely on this defense, who aren't a big defense. They aren't really a fast defense by any means, but they are opportunistic, gritty one, with a lot of transfers brought in by Kurt Cignetti from JMU, who can get after you. You got guys like Mikhail Kamara, Aiden Fisher at the linebacker level, D'Angelo Pons in the secondary, who's gone up against, might I add, Jeremiah Smith in practice in high school since they went there together. But it's all going to come down to how these two quarterbacks rely on their weapons. Indiana might not have as many weapons, but I feel like Curtis Rourke, if he can remain calm, can understand the situation enough that he keeps this offense in safety in terms of keeping the ball out of Ohio State's hands. And on the Ohio State side of things, Will Howard just can't make that one mistake that could lead to the season going off the rails for Ohio State. And if that happens, then I think Ohio State should win this game comfortably. But Indiana have gotten to this point for a reason. They're a team that I feel can hang tough in any game that they face. And so that's why I feel like if Curtis Rourke, like I said, relies on his weapons and relies that he can be effective himself, this game can be close. But I think Ohio State's got it just because they feel like the more complete, superior team right now. And as long as Will Howard keeps the ball safe, then they should win this game comfortably. But there's always that seed of doubt that I have to talk to you about, because he is someone who, like I said, is prone to mistakes. And we've seen it already this season, so I have to mention it. But look for Ohio State to want to get out to an early lead here and protect it. Then let's talk about a game not as meaningful in the SEC, but still a very, very fun matchup, because these two teams vary stylistic differences. Then my top note here about Vanderbilt going up against LSU. LSU are the 9.5-point favorites in this one, but from how they play throughout the season, Vanderbilt can pull this one off. And I feel like, the underrated star of the year has to go to Diego Pavia for how he's led this Vanderbilt Commodores offense, how he's led them to bowl eligibility, how he's pulled off certain upsets, how he's been in games against tough opponents like Texas this year, and giving them the chance to compete in a very tough logjam of the SEC. And the fact that he's done it through this hybrid option spread style is just really fun to watch. And he's really been perhaps my favorite fantasy college football player to talk about, just because of what he brings this team. On the LSU side of things, it's more about efficiency than anything. Garrett Nussmeier, a lot of teams haven't really faced a efficient quarterback like a Garrett Nussmeier. He's had his struggles this season, but he's actually looked in certain moments like one of the more pro-ready quarterbacks in college football. It's interesting because I read an article before coming on air about Garrett Nussmeier and how NFL scouts view him now. And they're saying that he should wait a year, and it feels pretty apt because Garrett Nussmeier is such a loyal player to LSU, but he still is someone who has all the traits, in my opinion, to be an effective NFL QB for whichever draft he goes in. So look for this game to be a battle of stylistic differences. If you're Vanderbilt, you're going to want to get Diego Pavia going. You have a big physical tight end in Eli Stowers that can be effective in exploiting this LSU defense. And if you're LSU, man, Garrett Nussmeier, Kyron Lacy, Aaron Anderson, efficiency, finishing drives, and moving the chains, that's what they're all about. And so this game, while, like I said, isn't necessarily important to either of these teams, still is going to be a fun one to watch just in your college football weekend tomorrow, because of the fact that these two teams could not be more drastically different in terms of style of play. Now let's talk about another kind of stylistically different game than many others this week, and perhaps the most important game in this rivalry since, like I said, the World War II era. Army taking on Notre Dame in Yankee Stadium, where a lot of great Army-Notre Dame games have already taken place in, like I said, the World War II era. But again, another kind of stylistic differences, but a lot more similarities than you think between these two offenses. Because when I look at Army, right, Bryson Daly, like I said, if he's fully healthy, he can really operate this Black Knights offense in a way that's different from what Notre Dame saw out of Navy a couple weeks ago. And if you can't control his style of things, where he's not throwing as much but can still move the chains with a pass, then that could spell trouble for this Notre Dame defense, even though they have become one of the best in the country. And then on the Notre Dame side of things, it's going to be all about how well Riley Leonard plays effectively in this one, because he has been more known for his style of play through the run game than, his passing prowess. But I feel like over the past couple of weeks, he has been more effective in terms of the pass. But this game could also very much be about their two backs, D'Adarian Price and Jeremiah Lowe, because they were very effective in that game against Navy. And this could be a battle of possession, too. If Army somehow finds themselves with a lot more possession than Notre Dame, then they could potentially win this football game. It's going to be about moving the sticks early in downs if you're Notre Dame through Love and Price, potentially allowing Riley Leonard to relax into this game and potentially take some deep shots down the field. But your goal if you're Notre Dame is to not let the different flow of this Army offense affect you, because this is a different animal entirely than what you saw from Navy. But I feel like Notre Dame is just looking like the more well-rounded team now. Leonard is really settling in this season, and he's relying on Love and Price to a certain effect. They're kind of reminding me of Ohio State light in that they bring in a transfer quarterback who's not necessarily, as a high-profile name that you could have gotten, and then you rely on these two running backs who can be really effective when they're on. And you really allow these quarterbacks to really settle into the system and learn it, and now they're paying it off. And so that's what I feel like Notre Dame can do in this one. And I feel like, Army has too many questions about Bryson Daly right now. And if they can't solve them, this could be another rough day for a triple option offense against Notre Dame. But I feel like, it's going to come down to which of these offenses can retain the ball. And I feel like both of them can be effective in that, and that's why it could be exciting from a fantasy perspective. And the last one definitely could be very exciting from a fantasy perspective. Colorado facing a rejuvenated Kansas team. And this one could be a weird one. This could be a potential upset brewing in Kansas. Colorado, of course, we already know the talent. They have one of the deepest wide receiver cores in the nation. They have one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. Almighty finesse. We might be watching this one in the future. But then you look at Kansas, right? A team that many people thought could be in the race for the Big 12, but didn't really show up this year. And a lot of questions were raised about the effectiveness of this offense. But over the past 2 weeks, in two major upsets that upended the status of the Big 12, Kansas's offense has come alive. And it's all been down to Jalen Daniels. He's one of the most explosive quarterbacks in the country when he's on. And he really can put a threat into this Colorado team. Whereas the Colorado side of things, I just feel like, for as deep as this team is, I feel like you don't necessarily want to get into a shootout this late in the season. You want to win games a little more comfortably. Because now you're looking at a potential spot in the Big 12 Conference Championship game. You just don't want to let it slip. The fact that Kansas has already beaten Kansas State and BYU and potentially eliminated them from the conference race, this game could be a potential trap game. But I think it's going to be a very explosive one. It's going to come down to some big plays on both ends of the football. So I'm going to be paying attention to this one. Hopefully you guys tune in as well. But this should just about do it for all the games I want to talk about from a fantasy perspective in college football. Coming next, it's your turn NFL. A lot of interesting games with huge fantasy implications there as well. And we'll be right back for this short break to talk about them.